Hi AP World, I'm Miss Ziegler, the Time Machine teacher, and on this channel we talk about everything AP World history as well as history in general. If you're new here and that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure and hit that subscribe button and don't forget to turn on your notifications so that you don't miss a thing. I'm just going to adjust this light just a little bit because it's really bright. There we go. All right, that's a little better. All right, well, welcome in. This is the first live since we were canceled. Hello, hello. I totally miss you guys. Hey, Pedro, Samuel, and Brooke, how's it going? Make sure and drop a comment in so that I know that you're here. Tonight, we're going to be talking about World War II. Before we get started on that, though, I just want to let you know that distance learning will start next week on Tuesday. Hi, Pedro. Hi, Katie. Good to see you guys. If you have not joined the Teams Microsoft for our class yet, I sent you guys an email today. So you should have a link to be able to do that. Make sure that you join and drop a comment in there when you get there. I'm also going to be emailing you out a link to the online textbook that we'll be using for review. That's an updated version. Yay, we got the updated version. I know you're super excited about anytime you get to read the online textbook. Hi, Wan Ying. Good to see you. I hope you're doing well. So real quick, before we get started, just drop a comment in there. Let me know how you're doing. I know everybody's been staying home. It's quite interesting because before spring break, all I wanted was one day at home where I didn't get interrupted 50 times. And now I'm like, man, I want to go back to school. Isn't it funny that we don't appreciate what we have until we don't have it anymore? Hi, Isabella. How you doing? So just drop a comment in there. Let me know what you've been doing. What are your thoughts about all this? And then we're going to get started reviewing World War II. Like I said before, on Tuesday is when distance learning is going to start. And we've kind of got a schedule based on the different periods. And you should be getting an email or a call out about that pretty soon. So try not to stress about it. The teachers have really been working hard to learn technology. And of course, I'll be here on YouTube and giving you guys videos that way. So we've got plenty of ways that we can continue to learn this information and get you ready for the AP exam. If you didn't listen to the video about the AP exam and the changes, make sure you do that. If you have listened to it, you will know that it is going to be online and you're going to be taking it at home. It's only going to be 45 minutes. So if this is ever the year to take it, this is definitely your year because it will be hopefully a lot easier to be able to reach that 4 or 5 and get credit for this class. So what we're going to be doing once school starts next Tuesday, we do distance learning. We're going to be reviewing and getting you ready for that exam. So just make sure that you tune into whatever your teachers are doing. And of course, I'll still be doing YouTube videos as well. All right, so let's get started talking about World War II. The new format of the exam is only going to go up to the end of imperialism, but I wanted to finish World War I and World War II with you guys because if you have to write an essay on the exam, we're not sure yet if you're going to have to, but if you do, then you might be able to use World War I or World War II as context. Like, let's say that your essay is about imperialism. You could talk about how imperialism leads to World War I as context. Okay, so that's why I want to make sure that we finish this out, and then we'll be starting on review on Tuesday. So here we go. Let's talk about the context of World War II. So World War I ends, right? And it ends with the Treaty of Versailles. We know that Germany is not happy about the treaty because they are blamed for everything in regards to World War I. They're blamed for it. And they also have to pay a large reparation, which means money that they're paying to the country a lot of money during the war to win it. And so they are in huge debt. France and Britain took some loans out from the United States that they have to repay. Germany has to pay the reparations. So it's just not a good situation overall. All right. The Central Powers, though, Germany and Austria-Hungary, they're going to suffer greater than the Allied nations because they're paying these reparations. Okay, so Germany ends up that they cannot pay this money. because they don't have it. And so they print more money, which causes inflation. And inflation basically means that their money is worth less, like it's decreased in value. It's not worthless, it's just worth less, okay? And so prices are going to rise, everything gets more expensive, and this is all going on in the 1920s in Germany. Around that same time, France and Great Britain are trying to repay their debts to the United States, but they can't because Germany is not paying them. So it's kind of like this domino effect. Also, remember at the end of World War I, we have the Russian Revolution where the Soviets take over. Once the Soviets take over, they don't want to pay the debts that Russia had before from the war. And so that kind of causes a problem as well. Hey, Sarah, welcome in. Good to see you. And Brookie's here too. Oh, she thought I was calling her name. Suri was trying to help me out, but I said Sarah, not Suri. Anyway, all right, let's keep going. So in 1929, we have the Great Depression, and it starts in the United States because of agricultural overproduction as well as the stock market crashing. All right, so this affects the whole world. It's eventually going to throw everyone into a Great Depression because the United States is so connected to so many other places. So Africa, Asia, Latin America, they're all going to suffer because they are dependent upon imperial nations, and those imperial nations are going through the Great Depression. Japan also suffers because of the decline in foreign trade that they were dependent on. All of this Great Depression, the economic problems, Treaty of Versailles, all of that leads to the rise of fascism. Fascism is spelled like this. It's a little tricky. There you go. And fascism is basically extreme nationalism. It's usually glorified military or like a militaristic state. They blame minorities for the country's problems, and they suppress any political competition with violence and force. So they're trying to basically keep out anybody that's going to be in political competition with them. Sarah, are you taking notes? You better be taking notes. Thank you for the compliment, though. All right, so the fascist leaders that come to power during this time: Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and we will also see Franco in Spain. Now, Franco has to fight a civil war in order to get his position, but once he gets it, he's going to stay there as dictator for a very long time, and Hitler and Mussolini support him and kind of help him win that spot. Obviously, it's in his favor, it's in both of their favor, Hitler and Mussolini, the more fascist dictators there are in Europe, because then they can kind of team up together, all right? Now remember, this is all context. We're still in context, okay? So context of World War II. Basically, what's going on in between World War I and World War II that's going to lead up to World War II. And if you have any questions, make sure and drop them in the comments. All right, so we also have these unresolved tensions after World War I. Basically, nationalism starts to rise in colonial areas, and more ethnic groups want their freedom from the imperial powers. So that's something else that's happening. The British government comes out with what's called the Balfour Declaration. This is how you spell it. Oops, there's an L in there. There you go, the Balfour Declaration. And basically, that was to declare that Palestine would become a home for the Jews. Now, if you rewind a long time ago to the very beginning of the year when we talked about the Jews, their homeland was Israel. And according to the Bible, God gave them that land for their home. They were supposed to go in and kill everyone that was in there and take over that land, okay? But they didn't do that. They went in and they co-inhabited the land with the people that were already there. And that caused a lot of problems because the people that were already there were not their same religion, and they served false gods. And so the Bible talks about how they were eventually kicked out of Israel and sent on what's called a diaspora. All right. Diaspora is where they were at during World War I and after and into World War II. That's why there were so many Jewish people all around the world, because they didn't technically have a homeland. So after World War I, the British decide, hey, we're going to let you go back to Palestine, formerly Israel. Well, when the Jews were there in the very beginning, right? That's what they called it. And then they left on their diaspora and becomes Palestine again. So the British say, hey, we're going to send you back and you can have that as your homeland. Now, here's the problem. The Palestinians were still living there. So when the Jews go back, they have to once again coexist. In the past, that didn't work, right? And it still didn't work in this time frame, and it's still a problem today. We're still seeing these problems. If you watch the news, you can still see the tension there between the Jews and the Muslims. All right. Also, this is eventually, after World War II, going to get worse and lead to wars between the Palestinians and the Jewish people. And the Jewish people win, and that's why it's no longer called Palestine. It's called Israel now. So that's just a little brief history of that. But it all kind of starts here with the Balfour Declaration, where the British say, hey, we're going to let the Jews go back into this homeland. All right. Now, Jews that support this are called Zionists. Basically, what they believe is that they have the right to go back to that area because that's their homeland. So this is, of course, going to cause problems between the Jews and the Muslims into World War National Congress. And that's basically a group that's set up to kind of help the governing powers. But there are several people who still don't like this. They want to be completely independent from the British. And so they form special groups. And one of these groups was Gandhi's followers. This is how you spell his name. Let's see, I think there's an H in there, yeah. So Gandhi decides that he wants to practice what's called civil disobedience. And this is how he says that they should protest. Is it E or N? So civil disobedience means that they're basically allowed to break laws and serve jail time. There we go. And serve jail time in order to protest against the British. Okay. We also have Muslim leaders in India. Remember, India is divided between the Hindus and the Muslims. And the Muslim leaders want to completely separate and form a new state called Pakistan. And so that kind of gets rolling in this era as well. Now, neither India or Pakistan will get their full independence until after World War II. So that doesn't happen for a long time yet. All right, in Korea is under Japanese control. They took it over in 1910, and nationalism starts to rise there. They protest against the Japanese shut it down, but this is the first time that the Koreans are really looking for independence. China, they have their own set of problems because China fought on the side of Great Britain and France and the U.S., okay? The U.S. kind of comes in at the end of World War I to help. So China fights on their side. After World War I, they hope that they will be given the land that was once controlled by Germany in northeast China. They were promised that for helping in the war. However, Japan wants it as well. And Great Britain and Japan decide to give it, Great Britain and France decide to give it back to Japan and not China. This is really upsetting to the Chinese intellectuals, and they start to hold demonstrations against the Japanese. One of those demonstrations was the May 4th movement, and this basically symbolized China's growing nationalism. During this time, several joined the Communist Party and kind of paved the way for communism coming into China. So two groups start to come forth, and one of those is the Chinese Communist Party. That one is led by Mao, and then the other one is the Chinese Nationalist Party, which will later be led by Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, those two groups will later have a Chinese civil war, eventually results in the communists taking over. In 1935, when the Chinese Civil War was going on, this is before World War II, remember? However, they suspended the war to go and fight the Japanese because the Japanese were taking over a northern area that China had control of called Manchuria, okay? And the Chinese will go to fight against the Japanese coming into that area. The Japanese set up a puppet state in that area where they're in control of it, but it's not like surface level. The Chinese are still kind of in control of it, okay? So all of this is going on before World War II even starts. You can see that there was mass tension between these countries in the world even before a war even breaks out. We also have some independence movements happening in Africa because they thought that by fighting in World War I and helping the imperialist powers, they would get independence as well, and that didn't happen. All right, so that's all context stuff. Now we're going to go on to the causes. So more like immediate causes, okay? You could also still use this for context. Wan Ying, I do not know when the next live is going to be. I'm thinking that we might do one on Monday night with all of the teachers because I want to like roll out what we're going to be doing for review. Super excited about it. But I have to talk to them tomorrow and see if they... By the way, guys, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I really appreciate it. Okay, so let's go on to some big causes, all right? So the first one, of course, is the unresolved tensions after World War I, which is what we just talked about. Economic instability is definitely a big cause. This leads to fascism, all right? Before we left on break, in my class, we talked about how Hitler came to power and how the Nazis were able to take over the country and get the German people to follow them and to commit horrible atrocities during the Holocaust. If you have not covered that yet in your class, there is an online Holocaust lesson that you can do. There's modules that you can go through on the Holocaust website. It's awesome. Like the modules are so cool and they just really give you a lot of visuals about this time frame and help you understand how Hitler took over the country and took over the minds of the people. So if you've not covered that in your class yet, make sure you check out that video. And I think I posted it like last week or something, and you can see that one and it'll help you understand this time frame. But basically, when Hitler comes to power, things are economically bad. And he uses the Jews as an excuse, kind of like a scapegoat as to why the country is so bad. He says that it's the Jews' fault. The Jews worked with the powers that were against us during World War I. They worked with the Allies. That's basically what he claims, all right? And the people start to think, hey, maybe this is true, because at the time, the Jewish people in Germany were pretty well-to-do. They were mostly doctors and lawyers and artists, and they had some money. And so people started to think, well, maybe that's why they're doing so well. You know, maybe that's why they're not struggling as much in this economy. But a lot of them also own businesses. And we know that people need groceries, people need food. And so, of course, that's why they're going to continue to do well. So he blames the Jews for the problems. He also uses propaganda. The Nazis were amazing at propaganda. I mean, it's just ridiculous how well they did with that, because they took over everything. They took over the movies, the radio, anything that you would see. It was all Nazi theory propaganda. They also passed the Nuremberg Laws. Let me put that up here so you can spell that. The Nuremberg Laws, spelled like this. The Nuremberg Laws were basically laws that discriminated against the Jews and kept them from having a lot of rights. They're separating the Jews from society. They're making an us and them group. Now, an example of this is that Jews could not marry a non-Jew. That was against the law. Jews were eventually stripped of their citizenship. They couldn't be German citizens. Propaganda would create this hostility, and then the German people started to support these Nuremberg laws. All right. All of this is going to lead up to what's called Kristallnacht. I want to make sure that I spell it right. I think it's got 2 L's. And this is German word. It basically means the night of broken glass. And this was a government ordained activity that basically gave permission to the German people to go around and destroy Jewish businesses, synagogues, take people from their homes and send them to concentration camps. Around 30,000 Jews were arrested that night and sent to concentration camps. It's a very, very scary night if you were Jewish. Very bad time. Some are later going to be released from those concentration camps, but not all of them. Hitler basically, through this, promises to bring the German people back to their former glory. And that's, of course, what they want. They want to be like they were before the war. And so many Germans found this appealing, that they could be better and they could increase their living space. This was another one of his ideas. He wanted to conquer more land so they could expand Germany and become more vast and eventually have more of an Aryan race. Remember, his idea of Aryan was the blue eyes and blonde hair and light skin. And so all of this targeted the Germans, especially the children. Hitler knew that the children would be easy to convince. So he completely stripped the schools of any teachers that would not teach Nazi theory and replaced them with people who would. And kids start to learn this Nazi theory and this anti-Semitism and, get rid of the disabled people and all of these ideas that Hitler was promoting. So if you have not done that online activity, make sure that you do that. It's amazing. And even if you're not filling out the paperwork, if your teacher has not required it for a class, at least go on there and look at those modules because it will really help you understand how Hitler gets people to follow him. Okay. Also, we have right before World War II, Hitler and Stalin signed the Non-Aggression Pact. Who's in charge of the Soviet Union, Hitler in charge of Germany, and they're not going to attack each other. They won't take aggression against each other. Hitler offers Stalin control of Eastern Poland if he can have Western Poland. Okay? And Hitler basically wants Western Poland to go in and expand that living space for the German people. So that was part of this agreement. And Hitler invades Poland September 1st, 1939. Great Britain and France promised Poland that they would protect them. And so that pulls them in, and World War II begins in Europe. Now, Japan in Asia is already trying to expand, and they had invaded Manchuria. Remember, they're eventually going to attack China because of some incidents between the Japanese and the Chinese troops. And that's when World War II starts in Asia. So we have 2 theaters, they're called. One is the European theater, and the other is the Asian theater, or the Eastern and Western theater, okay? That's what we'll be talking about as we talk about how World War II was conducted. So that's your next topic. We're going to go into how World War II was actually fought or conducted. So Japan wants to create what they call a new order in East Asia. Southeast Asia is the first place that they wish to expand to. There are some obstacles, though, because the U.S. has put sanctions on Japan because they occupied China. So Japan depends on the U.S. for oil and iron. And so this is a problem that now the U.S. won't trade with them because of these sanctions. And they want to retaliate against the U.S. because they hoped that by retaliating against the U.S., the West would say, okay, we will submit to you. Okay. Hitler, as all this is going on, he has this tactic in the way that he fights. It's called Blitzkrieg. And here we go. And Blitzkrieg basically means lightning war. It's a very fast way of fighting. Basically, he goes in and takes control very quickly through air raids and intense bombardment at the beginning. So by 1940, Hitler had conquered Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, and France. He even got all the way into Paris and set up a pro-Nazi regime called the Vichy. It's kind of interesting because when I saw that Paris had been shut down and that they closed the restaurants and the bars and that people were told to stay home, it's crazy to me to think that, because Paris is such a hustling, bustling city, all of the tourists and everybody wanting to go there. And I thought probably the last time that happened was probably during World War II when the Nazis came in. And I was reading a book recently about that, about how the City of Lights shut down when the Nazis came in, but the Nazis wanted Paris to go back to its original flavor, right? They want to be able to enjoy it. And so they tried to get things back open, but of course the feel of being occupied, an occupied city, was just not the same as before the war. Okay, so the U.S. promises in 1940 to help Great Britain, and they send supplies and help with their military. The Battle of Britain happens in July of 1940. This is when Hitler orders a campaign against Great Britain. He sends in the German Air Force to bombard the country. So during this time, they at first targeted military bases, and then they're going to turn on cities. And so the British Royal Navy fights back by raiding Berlin. Winston Churchill, he's prime minister at the time, he calls this Britain's finest hour because they were bombarded for months and the people had to just handle it, basically. They had to just put up with it and be able to find shelter wherever they could. Eventually, the military forces Hitler to postpone that invasion by May of 1941, and Hitler turns his sights towards the Soviet Union. Now remember, they had that pact, right? But Hitler breaks it and he says, no, I want more living space, so I'm going to break the non-aggression pact and attack the Soviet Union. So he attacks in 1941. At first, it went really good. But one thing Hitler did not anticipate was how bad the Russian winter was. Now, a lot of you have said before, why do we have to learn history, Missy? Why do we even care about this? Well, let me tell you. If Hitler had been paying attention to his history teachers, he might have known that it was a bad idea to invade Russia right before winter, because Napoleon did the same thing and he left with his tail between his legs because he could not do it. He couldn't withstand the Russian winter. And the same thing happens here with Hitler. Now, it takes a while, but eventually he is defeated and forced out of Leningrad. And as I said, if he would have known history, he would have known that he should go in the spring, but he did not. So there's just a little life lesson for you. Make sure you listen to your history teacher because you never know when you might want to invade Russia. All right. Anyway, anybody have any questions so far? You can drop them in the comments if you do. Don't forget. I know you're all probably diligently taking notes. Yes, Samuel, that's what I'm saying. If you ever are in a position where you have to attack Russia, which I would not advise it, unless you have a very large army, but if you ever are, don't go in the winter. I've never been there in the winter. I've been there in the summer, though, and it's lovely because the sun stays up for a long, long time, and there's only about 4 hours of darkness, and it's just amazing. You feel like you can just stay up all day because you have this amazing energy. My friend that lives there, I'm actually going to try to get him to do a live with us, so stay posted about that. I want him to talk to you guys about his life over there. It's pretty interesting. All right, Isabella says, it's possible to attack Russia in the winter, but nobody can survive that cold. Yeah, it's impossible. Yes, you're right. Now, what the biggest problem was is that the machinery, like the tanks and the things that Hitler was taking in to attack them, they couldn't run in that kind of weather. It was too cold. So that was a big problem. And then, of course, the men couldn't survive the coldness either. So, yeah, very good. All right, so now let's go on to December 7th, 1941. What happens on December 7th, 1941? Anybody know? I'll give you extra credit if you know. Don't Google it. December 7th, 1941. I'll give you a hint. Hawaii. Anybody know? Yes, Pearl Harbor. That's right. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, drawing the UO and tour that site, it's an amazing memorial. There were some ships that sank and it trapped the men inside because this was a Sunday and most of the men and people there were still sleeping and they weren't expecting any kind of attack like this. And there are some ships that sunk with the men still inside. And so they've left them there in the harbor as a memorial to those men who died there. And it's just a very breathtaking kind of experience to go and know that that took place there at that site. So definitely, if you ever get a chance to go, definitely go. Now, Japan thought that this would make the U.S. submit to their will and negotiate with them. However, the public were outraged and they called for this mass retaliation against Japan. It causes the U.S. to join the war. And China at the time also joins the war to fight against Japan. So it kind of backfires what Japan actually thought was going to happen. Hitler will then respond with his own declaration of war against the United States and decide to help Japan. Okay. Now remember, we still have places that are colonized. They will help their colonial powers as well. So they're still fighting. And this is when it truly becomes a world war because all over the world, there are parts of this war going on. So what's life like on the home front? Well, in World War I, we talked about total war where everything went towards the war effort. That happens again in World War II, where all the resources, everything that they have on the home front are put towards the war. Women go back to work in the factories on the home front. We have a lot of propaganda for that. One of the propaganda people that they used to encourage women to join the war effort was Rosie the Riveter. You know, the one that's like, we can do it. You know that one? That's Rosie the Riveter. And so this was kind of a way to get women to want to help their country, right? You're helping your country if you go and you work in the factories. Japan, on the other hand, they claimed that they were better than everyone else because they wanted their women to stay home and continue nurturing the family. And so they did not influence their women to go work in the factories. Okay, so we talked about the European theater and the Japanese theater. Finally, after the United States joins the war, we have a little tide turning in the European theater. What happens is the Germans are defeated in North Africa by the British, and they're defeated on the Eastern Front by Stalin. Eventually, they're kicked out of Russia by Stalin and also the Russian winter, right? Or Soviet Union. Sorry, it's not Russia at this time. And the tide will eventually turn in the Pacific theater as well. The Allies win the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway. And there's a movie that just came out about that. Now you have time to watch it, so you might want to check it out. I think I saw it in the Red Box the last time that I was there, but maybe you can get it online. That way you don't have to leave. So after they win the Battle of Midway, they push the Japanese back. And General MacArthur of the U.S. starts what's called island hopping. And it's this strategy where they're going to attack the islands where Japan was the weakest and skip over the islands where Japan was the strongest. That way they could continue making their way towards Japan. Allies had success because of improved technology. They had these ginormous aircraft carriers that allowed airplanes to take off from the deck of the aircraft, and they could use them for raids and collecting intelligence. I think you can see one of these aircraft carriers. I think they have one here in Texas. If anybody knows about that, let me know, but I'm pretty sure there's one at one of our ports. There's also one in North Carolina where I used to live that you could tour, and it's just amazing. These things are ginormous, and they have so much going on, and they are basically like a floating airport in the middle of the ocean. And submarines are also used against Japan. So by 1943, the Axis powers were on the defensive. The Allies had captured Rome, Italy in 1944. Remember, Mussolini was the fascist dictator there, so he was definitely not on our side. He was on Hitler's. And then in June of 1944, we have what's called D-Day. This is seen in Saving Private Ryan, if you get a chance to watch that movie. It's very, very graphic, though, so if you kind of have a weak stomach, you might not want to watch it. But it is a really good rendition of what happened during that invasion. And basically, the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, which is northern France. Casualties were really high, but they did that in June 6th, and by August they had made their way to Paris and were able to liberate Paris from the Nazis. In 1944, the Germans are going to fight the Allies in the Battle of the Bulge, and the Allies win this battle. At that point, Germany had no chance of winning, but Hitler did not want to give up. And so the Allies conducted air raids over Germany in March of 1945. The Soviet troops were closing in from the east at the same time. Hitler's kind of like hunkered down in a bunker in Berlin. And on April 30th, 1945, he committed suicide. And the Nazis will surrender. That's the word I'm looking for. The Nazis will surrender shortly after that. Now, there are some conspiracy theories that say that Hitler escaped to Argentina, and there's a really good show on the History Channel that's called Hunting Hitler, and you should check it out because it's so cool. But basically, they go to Argentina, and they're kind of like tracking down how some of the higher up Nazis escaped to Argentina to live out the rest of their life and not be punished for their war crimes. On May 8th, 1945 is specifically the day that the Nazis will surrender, and it's called VE Day, which means Victory in Europe. This is how it's written. That day is May 8th, 1945. So that's what's going on in the European theater. Now, if you go to the Pacific theater or the Asian area, March 1945, rewind a little bit, U.S. troops had captured Okinawa and Iwo Jima in Japan, and they're prepared to attack the mainland. They start to bomb Tokyo, and the emperor is just not willing to surrender. President Truman orders the U.S. to drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima and one on Nagasaki. He drops them 3 days apart. This results in 140,000 civilian deaths. Japan surrenders on August 14th, which became known as VJ Day, Victory in Japan. Now, there's a lot of arguments about whether or not it was necessary to drop these bombs. It definitely caused a lot of deaths, a lot of pain, things that Japan are still dealing with today. And so it's very interesting to read some of those theories. But Truman made that decision, and that happened, ending World War II. Now, we want to go in to talk a little bit about the mass atrocities that happened in World War II, and then we'll be finished. So we have genocide going on, a lot of ethnic violence. That all happens during World War II. And sometimes it's somewhat overlooked when people talk about World War II because of all the battles and the intense fighting. But all these things were happening, kind of underlining all of that. So Hitler took note of what the world did when the Armenians were killed by the Turks. Remember, back in World War I, like during that time frame, the Ottomans wanted to Turkify that area, the Ottoman Empire. And basically the Young Turks came forward and they said, hey, we want this all to be one group, all the same beliefs. And they kicked the Armenians out. And by doing so, they caused a genocide of the Armenians. And what happened was the world didn't do anything. They didn't step in. And so Hitler saw this, and he told the Nazis, he said, listen, we can get rid of the Jews and nobody's going to stop us. They're not going to care. And that's kind of how it happened at the very beginning, and even into the Holocaust a little bit as well, because the world was not really trying to help. Yes, they were against Hitler, but they weren't necessarily fighting for the end of the Holocaust. They were fighting so that he wouldn't continue to take over Europe because he was a fascist dictator. And so Hitler was able to murder 6 million Jews before he was stopped. I really think that a lot of the Allied powers didn't really, like, not necessarily the powers, but the people, the civilians didn't really know what was going on as much. You have to remember that there's not the news and the internet and the things that we have today. Today, I think it would be a little harder to get away with that, but maybe not. So These ethnic atrocities did not end with World War II, though, unfortunately. And each of the genocides that happened after World War II, the ethnic groups are targeted in most of the same ways that the Nazis were targeted. Okay, so that's important to note. And I think we're going to talk about that later. Okay, so let's go back to the Armenian Genocide and just review that for a minute. This results in 1.5 million Armenian deaths in Turkey. The Ottoman government basically says that the Armenians are working with the Russians during World War I, and the Russians were enemies of the Ottoman Empire. So they used that as an excuse to deport the Armenians out of the Ottoman Empire into concentration camps. Many die along the way, and then many die in the camps. And the Turkish government still claims that this was an act of war and not a genocide. However, it is categorized as a genocide in other parts of the world. Okay, now not only do we have genocide going on, we also had a pandemic going on at the end of World War I. Kind of ironic, because we're having one going right now. And so we're kind of experiencing that. It was a little bit different, though, because at the time they didn't really know a lot about viruses and how things spread. But it was called the Spanish flu or influenza. It happened in 1918 when the soldiers returned from World War I. They brought it with them. By 1919, it had killed 20 million people worldwide. And it's much the same as what we're facing now in the world. It's crazy. We also have a man-made genocide. This one happens in Ukraine, and it's called the Great Famine. So what happens with this is, after World War I, Ukraine wanted to be independent, and they were for a little while. However, Ukraine is a producer of agricultural goods. They're the breadbasket of that area, so to speak. So when Lenin took over Russia and made it into the Soviet Union, he wanted Ukraine back because they needed those resources. They needed that food. So Lenin negotiates for them to come back into the Soviet Union. After Lenin dies, Stalin comes to power. And remember, Stalin has his 5-year plan, where part of that was to collectivize farms and basically bring farms all under one realm where people are working on it together. They give all the food to the government, and then the food is redistributed as people need it, right? That was the general idea. The Ukrainians and several other peasants in the Soviet Union did not like this theory. They didn't want to do this. They wanted to keep their own areas, their own farms for themselves. And so they start to protest against this. And they fight back by hiding food, killing their cattle, destroying machinery so that they can't collectivize. And Stalin, he was not to be played with. He was like, well, this is not going to be allowed. And so he sends the government in to basically collect the food, force the Ukrainians to collectivize. And he says that he will give food back, but he doesn't. He actually goes to the lengths of keeping food out of Ukraine, where he won't let any food come across the border at all. So it's basically a man-made famine that is categorized as a genocide. It's estimated that 7 to 10 million died as a result of this famine. And there are some stories about how when they were collecting the food to send it out of Ukraine back to the capital so that they could give it to industrial workers, they would surround it with barbed wire to keep the Ukrainians away from like this big, huge pile of potatoes. And all this time, all the while, Ukrainians are starving to death. So if you think about it, Stalin really wasn't that much better than Hitler. He was doing similar things. It just wasn't under the same circumstances. And remember, Stalin is on the winning side. So history remembers the winners a little bit differently, which is interesting. However, historians have started to come out with some criticisms against Stalin for the things that he has done as a result of, more learning and more research and things like that. So I think eventually it will change to where Stalin will be seen as bad as what Hitler is seen today. So we talked about the Holocaust. Basically, that was Hitler's solution, was getting rid of the Jews. One thing, though, that I do want to mention, make sure that you remember this. It's very important to remember that before the genocides have happened, certain things take place. One of those is that an ethnic group is blamed for the country's problems. Then that ethnic group is separated with identifiers. In the case of the Holocaust, they were identified with a Jewish star. This happens, though, in every genocide since. They're always separated out. And that makes it easier for the public to not like them, right? Because they're separate. They're a separate group. It's not my family that is in danger, so I'm not going to worry about it kind of mentality. Also, they are discriminated against with laws and propaganda. Once again, happens in Rwanda. You all studied the Rwandan Genocide last year when you took world geography, and you remember probably that there were two groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. And when the imperialist powers were there, they favored the Tutsis. But then when they left, the Hutus were actually the majority. And when the Hutus got power, that spurred the genocide. But before that happens, there was propaganda against the Tutsis. They were identified as separate groups. So had the world been paying attention to this, that genocide and all the other genocides might have been able to be avoided had we just been paying attention. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. If it ever happens in the United States that an ethnic group is separated or that laws are put up against them, let that trigger in your mind that, hey, this could be bad. Someone needs to take action. The public needs to be aware of this. All right. Now, the Japanese were not very nice people either during this war. Remember, they're at odds with China over Manchuria. So they want to expand, and China is basically not letting them do that. They're especially evil to the Chinese during the Second Sino-Japanese War. That happens in 1937, before World War II starts. During that war, they killed 1,000 Chinese soldiers and civilians in the rape of Nanking. Okay, very, very bad time frame for that war. It's a dark spot on Japanese history for sure. Throughout World War II, they're going to practice the program called Asia for Asiatics. Let me write that down. And basically what that means, sorry about the blurriness, is that they are going to force people that they conquer into labor camps, and they will eventually force women into becoming comfort women or prostitutes for the Japanese army. So they're very bad, as well as how they treat the Chinese and the other people that are in Asia at that time. The Allies, remember, they're not innocent either. They firebombed cities in Germany and Japan, as well as, of course, the atomic bombs at the end of the war. So many historians argue about the actions taken and what categorizes as a war action versus something that is a criminal action, right? All right, so overall, World War II, 75 million deaths, 2/3 were civilians. It shapes how people think about racism, definitely anti-Semitic ideas and how that all plays out, international struggles between all these places, and it's eventually going to lead to a conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union known as the Cold War. And if we have time at the end of the year, after you guys take the exam, we will be going back to talk about the Cold War. We're not going to take time to talk about it now just because it's not going to be on your exam. So we decided that we would review with you first and then go back to talk about that at the end of the year. So real quickly, if you have any questions, make sure you drop them in the box for me, and I will be quick to answer them. Also, stay tuned to my Instagram, Time Machine Teacher. I'll be posting when lives will be on that, as well as any other announcements that you may need to know for school. And if you don't have any questions, I guess that's it. I just want to let you know it was so awesome to see you guys tonight, even if I couldn't really see you. I miss you so, so much. And I'm so ready to go back, but it doesn't look like we're going to be able to go back anytime soon. So we might just have to do a Zoom call sometime because That's a lot of fun. And then I can see your happy little faces. Please reach out to any of your teachers. Even if I'm not your teacher, just reach out to me if you need some help, because I've been more than happy to help you. And just let us know, even if it's not history related, let us know if you need anything during this time. All right, guys, I'm going to head out of here. You guys have a great evening, an even better weekend, and get ready to start studying for that AP exam on Tuesday, because that's when we're going to get started. All right. Bye. Thank you.